off the series of interviews today, and our first interview is with the lovely Shaz. Shaz is one of the mortgage specialists within our Power team, and he covers everything from development finance, bridging finance, refurbs, through to the buy-to-let mortgages, HMO mortgages, and even service accommodation. So Shaz, what is bridging finance and how is it different to buy-to-let mortgages?
Cheers, Hannah. So bridging finance is a type of mortgage, except it's short term, ends up to 24 months normally, and it's ideal for properties that can't be mortgaged. Maybe they're in a state of disrepair, or just a total wreck, or it could be that you get a property below market value. So on a mortgage, they'll look at the purchase price or the value and lend you against the lower cost. Bridging can be a lot more creative. Or if you need the money really quickly, if you're going to auction, things like that, that's where bridging finance comes in. A mortgage obviously is a long term, 25, 30 years, whereas bridging's up to 2 years.
Great, thanks. What's the lender's criteria for using bridging finance?
So lenders really want a profitable and successful project because they're only in and out in say 9 months. So they want to make sure that your plan and your exit strategy is realistic and feasible. So you have a lot of people doing bridging finance where they're going to add value and sell the property. So they want to make sure that work they're doing is realistic and it's going to add X amount of value.
Sure.
If you're doing a project where it's buy, refurbish, refinance, you want to make sure you're mortgageable. So lenders may say at that point, before they give you the money, can you get decision principle from your other lender to make sure you are going to get a mortgage? So whilst they want to know about the client, they're more concerned with the actual project and how successful it's going to be.
That makes sense. So if you're a first-time buyer or a first-time landlord, you can still use bridging finance?
You can, yeah. I mean, they do ask, how much experience have you got? Have you done this before? If you haven't, they just want to make sure that if you've got a build team, they've done something similar before, lending you the money to do the work, they want to make sure it's going to be on time and on track.
Yeah, great. So how much deposit do you typically need for bridging finance?
So this does depend quite a lot on the lenders that you're going to go with. I've seen some go as low as 20% deposit. Typically though it's 30%. What you've got to bear in mind though is that it's gross. So if you have interest that's retained, which is your interest and some of your fees are deducted off of the loan up front, so your net loan is a little bit lower.
Okay, that's good to know, thank you. And are there any other upfront costs with bridging finance?
Yeah, so the money you'll pay from your pocket, that'll be the cost of valuation, which again depends on the property value, the lender's legal fees as well as your own, you pay both sides, and if you do use a broker, then a broker fee as well.
Perfect. So thank you, everything you've given us so far has been really helpful. Have you got any creative ideas on how people can reduce the amount of cash they have to put in when using bridging finance?
Yeah, of course. So I often come with clients who've got a really good project, perhaps haven't got the money or cash ready to start it off. What you can do is if you've got additional security, so maybe a house that you live in or another investment property with no mortgage or a lot of equity in it, you can offer the lender a charge against that property for the duration of the project. So it's not a mortgage, it's a charge which comes off once you repay them. But if there's enough equity there, they can lend against that as well. And essentially you can have what they call no money down funding. And this is how you do those sorts of things. Another way of doing it is if you buy something that's genuinely below market value and confirmed by a surveyor. There are some lenders who lend against the open market value rather than the purchase price.
Well, okay.
So again, if the numbers work out, you could get full funding based on that as well.
Perfect. That's really helpful for the investors because I know a lot of them will find the perfect project, but they don't have the funds to start it. So they're really creative ways they can use it. So you mentioned people who follow the buy, refurbish, refinance strategy use bridging finance. Does it cover the cost of their refurb as well?
It can do. So there are some lenders who will lend for the cost of the work, but they will want to see a very robust schedule of works from yourself or your builder. That just itemises what you're doing individually, the cost and the timescale. If they do fund the work, it's always done in stages, in drawdowns, in arrears. So you have to have enough money to kickstart that process. And there are certain factors come into play, such as loan to cost and loan to end value. But yeah, definitely you can fund the work. That's
really interesting because I know a lot of the investors that we've spoke to, they can find a property and they may struggle with the refurb cost. So I think that's really useful to know. So what's the process for applying for bridging finance and how long does it usually take?
So process-wise, you'd normally get credit approved terms on day one. That's when you present your project to the lender or via a broker along with the supporting documents. The lenders will assess that with their credit committee. As long as they're happy, they'll give you a decision in principle similar to a mortgage.
Okay.
And that literally means that money's been set aside for that project for 14 days normally. Okay. And then simultaneously, once you've paid your legal fees and your valuation fees, they kickstart that process. Valuation is done fairly quickly for bridging, normally within a week.
Okay.
And the legals will have to act quickly as well to get it done on time. and essentially everything is underwritten and go. In terms of timescale, it can be as quick as 2 weeks, can go on for much longer than you think. I find the main reason things do drag out is perhaps the client's not using the best solicitor or the correct solicitor. It's really important to do that.
Yeah, I echo that. It's very important that you have the right team. And with our power team, that's what we try and give to our investors. So we use Heck Jones in Cardiff as solicitors, and they're very well versed on property investment, so it does help with speeding up that process.
True.
And when settling bridging finance with a mortgage, what loan to value do lenders typically offer?
It's a good question actually, and it's really important that people understand this at day one. So how much you can get in terms of loan to value really is dictated by the market rent of the property at the end. So there are lenders now, such as Kent Reliance and Kensington, who will go up to 85% loan to value.
Wow.
Rates aren't pretty, but it's there for a certain need. But typically you're looking at 80%, 75%. But what's really important is when you're working out your figures on your spreadsheets and whatnot, whatever your annual value is, you're going to refinance at say 80%, and that's what, are you going to be able to pull your money back out or not?
Yeah.
So that's what you've got to really understand.
And we get asked a lot by our investors whether they can refinance within 6 months. So everyone talks about the 6-month rule. Can you explain a bit more about this? Yeah,
so interesting you mentioned that. I've been doing a few presentations on the road about this. So just really briefly, the 6-month rule was brought in just after the credit crunch, because what people were doing before that was getting really high geared mortgages, 95%, 100%, with cash incentives on below market value properties, and then remortgaging the next day.
Yeah.
So what that meant was there was no really skin in the game. They had no equity in the property. So the council of mortgage lenders said, look, we're stopping that, you have to wait 6 months before you can refinance. Now they've softened up, it is more of a guideline. And there's 3 types of lending against that now. So you'll have some lenders within 6 months who will say, well look, we'll lend you the money, but just against the purchase price. That may not be so useful for people doing buy, refurbish, refinance, but maybe with an auction purchase it might work. You've got lenders who will say, well if you've done some work, can you evidence that with invoices and pictures, and we'll then do a valuation. And you've got a couple who will just do a fresh valuation within 6 months. I think what's key is you've got to kind of convince the valuer that it's worth X amount. So yeah, the survey is really important within 6 months.
Perfect, that's really helpful, thank you. And I think it's really creative how people can buy a property, refurb it to increase the value, and then refinance to pull their money out and recycle ready for the next project.
Exactly.
And so we know a lot of people talk about money in, money out in relation to buy, refurbish, refinance, or no money left in the deal. But we know of investors who are happy to leave 5, maybe up to £10,000 in a deal. What are your thoughts on this?
I think it purely depends on what the investor wants and what their strategy is. And I think it's important that as a broker I have that chat with them, and also as sources, I guess you guys do as well. You know, I've had investors who've left £30,000 in deals before, but they know they're getting that back in 10 months because it's a HO conversion with a high cash flow. You know, if you're flipping properties, the margins are high and you want to make X amount of money back. When you're refinancing, because you're keeping the asset as well, the margins are smaller, you're only going to refinance at 75%, 80% loan to value, so it's just understanding what the investor wants.
Yeah, I totally agree. And at Do God Property, we have like you say, a thorough conversation with our client at the beginning, to understand their goals and maybe cash flow versus money in, money out. And we highlight to them that maybe leaving some cash in the deal is in their best interest because it allows them to move on to the next project quicker. What would you say are the pros and cons of using bridging finance?
Pros and cons. So let's start with the cons first. Bridging can be expensive. I mean, it's all relative. It's definitely more expensive than a mortgage. But I always say to clients, look, if you've got your own cash or if you've got other people's money, great, use that, so it's going to be cheaper.
Yeah.
But if you haven't, bridging is a means to an end. And the rates are a lot more competitive these days than before. One of the other pros is, of course, if you use bridging, say you've got a big pot of cash, rather than tying it up in one project, you do that for 3 projects, 2 projects at the same time.
Okay.
So it allows you to do that by using bridging finance. Next one is a pro and a con, really. I suppose it's the survey that's going to get done. So you are at the mercy of the valuer and the surveyor to assess your project. You know, you've put your heart and soul into that, but they're going to give the figures. But if you flip that around, you've had a qualified individual confirm what you believe is true.
Yeah.
So I think those are some of the key pros and cons there.
So the pros far outweigh the cons.
Definitely.
And what would your top tips be for anyone using bridging finance?
I would say always factor in 10% on top of every cost you've had, and timescale as well. Always make sure you allow enough time for everything to be done. I would say make sure you use a broker. I would say that, you know, because there are some lenders who will take clients directly, and that's great. But then you are just trying to fit into that lender's policy. Whereas if you use a broker, we've got access to everyone and we can make sure it's the right lender for your project, as opposed to the other way around.
Yeah, no, useful, thank you. Thank you, Chaz, that's been really helpful and really informative. I know this is just a snapshot of bridging finance, so for anyone who does want to find out more information, we'll put your details across the bottom of the video to get in touch with you. So thank you for your time. And for everyone who's enjoyed this interview, make sure you keep an eye out for our next one, which will be with a special guest next week.